Cordelia Whitmore stood in Augustus Thornfield's barn, clutching her wedding dress like a shield against desperation. She had come to buy a horse with the only valuable thing she owned. Instead, she heard children crying beneath the floorboards. The whimpering came again, soft, broken. Thornfield had stepped away to consider her offer. The barn stretched empty around her, filled with shadows and the scent of hay gone sour. She followed the sound to a corner where loose boards covered what looked like a root cellar. Her hands shook as she lifted the wood. Two pairs of eyes stared, back at her from behind makeshift bars. A girl, maybe 8 years old with dark hair matted against her skull. A boy, slightly older, whose brown skin bore the pale marks of too little sun. Both children pressed against the crude cage that held them. Both had given up calling for help until they heard her footsteps above. Cora dropped to her knees. The wedding dress fell into the dirt beside her. "Who did this to you?" The girl spoke first, her voice barely a whisper. "Please, Senora. We have been here so long." The boy remained silent, but his eyes held an intelligence that made Cora's chest tighten. He had learned not to trust easily. She recognized that look from her own mirror back in Boston, after her father's debts had crushed their family into nothing. "What are your names?" "Luce," the girl said. "This is Samuel." Samuel nodded once, still measuring her, still deciding if hope was worth the risk. Cora examined the lock. Heavy iron, built to last, built to keep small hands from working free. Her stomach turned as she noticed the scratches around the mechanism where desperate fingers had tried and failed. "We have to get you out of here." "The man said we are going to new families," Luce whispered. But Samuel heard him talking. "We are not going to families." Samuel finally spoke. "We are going to people who buy children." The words hit Cora like a physical blow. She had read about such things in Boston newspapers. Stories from far off, places that decent people discussed in hushed tones over tea. She had never imagined herself face to face with it. Footsteps echoed outside the barn. Cora scrambled to replace the boards, her heart hammering against her ribs. She grabbed her dress and stood just as Thornfield returned, his boots clicking against the wooden floor. He was a large man, soft around the middle but strong in the shoulders, the kind of strength that came from years of moving cattle and breaking horses. His smile never reached his eyes. "Miss Whitmore, I have been thinking about your proposal." She forced herself to meet his gaze. "And?" "A wedding dress is a precious thing, especially one made for a bride who will never need it." The cruelty in his voice was casual, practiced. This was a man who had learned to enjoy other people's pain. "I need passage money," Cora said. "Nothing more." "Of course. But perhaps we can help each other in another way." Thornfield moved closer. She caught the scent of whiskey on his breath, though his movements remained steady. A man who drank but never let it control him. "I have business connections back east. Wealthy families who need governesses for their children. Educated women who can travel with discretion." The offer hung between them like smoke. Cora understood enough to know he was not talking about legitimate employment. The children below had confirmed that much. What would that involve? Simple. Escort work. You would accompany young ones to their new homes. Comfortable train travel. Good pay. Enough to get you back to Boston with money to spare. His eyes never left hers as he spoke. He was watching for her reaction, measuring her desperation against her moral boundaries. Cora thought of Luce and Samuel in their cage. She thought of her empty purse and the long road back to a city that held nothing but creditors and shame. She thought of the choice between survival and conscience. "I would need to know more details." Thornfield's smile widened. "Naturally, these arrangements require careful planning. The children must be prepared properly, cleaned up, taught to behave during the journey." "Where do the children come from?" "Orphans mostly. Street children who have no one to miss them. We provide them with opportunities they would never have otherwise." The lie rolled off his tongue like honey, practiced and smooth. How many people had he convinced with those same words? When would this happen? Soon. I have 2 young ones ready for transport, a Mexican girl and a colored boy, both well-behaved and grateful for the chance at better lives. Cora's throat tightened. He was talking about Luce and Samuel as if they were livestock being prepared for market. I need time to consider your offer. Of course. But do not take too long, Miss Whitmore. Opportunities like this do not wait forever. The threat in his voice was gentle but unmistakable. She had seen too much. He would not let her leave Silverbrook without making a choice. I understand. Good. Return tomorrow evening. We can discuss the details then. Cora nodded and walked toward the barn door, forcing herself to move slowly. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to put distance between herself and the horror she had discovered. But running would mean abandoning Luce and Samuel to whatever fate awaited them. She stepped into the late afternoon sun and felt the weight of impossible choices settling on her shoulders like dust. Cora walked the dusty streets of Silverbrook as evening shadows stretched across the broken ground. She needed allies, but trust was a luxury she could not afford to waste. The town felt different now. Every face might hide complicity in what she had witnessed. Every smile might mask the knowledge of children locked in darkness. She found Joaquin Delgado at the livery stable, brushing down a mare with methodical strokes. His hands moved with the careful attention of someone who understood that gentleness could coexist with strength. He looked up as she approached. His eyes held the wariness of a man who had learned to measure strangers against the weight of their intentions. Miss Whitmore. Mr. Delgado. She stood at the edge of the stall, watching him work. His movements never faltered, but she sensed him, evaluating her presence. The air between them carried the tension of unspoken questions. I need to ask you something about Josiah Bramwell. The brush stilled against the mare's flank. Joaquin's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. What about him? Do you believe he died in a riding accident? Joaquin resumed brushing, but the rhythm had changed. Each stroke now deliberate, controlled. He was buying time to decide how much truth to reveal. Josiah was the best horseman in 3 counties. The words hung in the stable air, heavy with implication. Cora felt the ground shift beneath her understanding of the situation. Then why would people believe he fell? People believe what they need to believe to sleep at night. Joaquin set down the brush and turned to face her fully. His expression held the weight of secrets carried too long in solitude. Why are you asking these questions? Cora studied his face, searching for signs of deception or complicity. She found only the careful composure of someone who had learned to guard his words. Because I think the same people who killed him are planning to hurt children. The statement dropped between them like a stone into still water. Joaquin's composure cracked for just a moment, revealing something raw beneath. What children? 2 children, locked in a cage under Thornfield's barn. Joaquin's hands clenched into fists. The mare sensed his tension and shifted nervously in her stall. You saw them? I spoke to them. A girl named Luce and a boy named Samuel. Joaquin closed his eyes. When he opened them again, they held the hollow look of someone confirming their worst fears. Josiah suspected something was wrong. He found discrepancies in the cattle transport records. Too many supplies ordered for the number of head being moved. What kind of supplies? Food for children, blankets, rope. The words hit Cora like cold wind across open ground. The systematic nature of the operation made her stomach turn. Did he confront Thornfield? He was planning to. The night before he died, he told me he was going to demand answers. They stood in silence as the implications settled between them. The mare nickered softly, the only sound in the gathering dusk. We need help, Cora said. Who would believe us? Thornfield owns half the town council. The sheriff is his drinking partner. What about the doctor? She examined Bramwell's body. Joaquin's expression shifted. Dr. Blackwood asked questions about the injuries, more questions than Thornfield liked. Where can I find her? She keeps an office above the general store, but be careful. Trust is a dangerous thing in this town. Cora left the stable with Joaquin's warning echoing in her mind. The streets felt even more hostile now, filled with eyes that might be watching and reporting her movements. She climbed the narrow stairs to Dr. Blackwood's office. The door opened before she could knock. Dr. Miriam Blackwood was a woman of perhaps 50, with steel gray hair pulled back severely, and hands that spoke of years spent healing the wounded. Her eyes held the sharp intelligence of someone who had learned to see past surface lies. "Miss Whitmore, I was expecting you." "You were?" Word travels fast in a small town, especially when strangers start asking questions about dead men. Dr. Blackwood stepped aside to let her enter. The office smelled of carbolic acid and dried herbs, the sense of someone who fought death with whatever tools she could find. "Sit." Cora took the offered chair. Dr. Blackwood remained standing, her posture rigid with the tension of someone perpetually ready for conflict. Josiah Bramwell did not die in a riding accident. The words came without preamble, delivered with the flat certainty of medical fact. "How do you know?" "Because I have seen men die from being thrown by horses, and I have seen men die from being beaten to death." Dr. Blackwood moved to her desk and pulled out a leather journal. She opened it to a page covered with precise handwriting. Josiah had injuries consistent with being struck repeatedly with a blunt object. The pattern of bruising suggested he was held down during the beating. Cora felt the air leave her lungs. The clinical description made Bramwell's murder feel immediate and personal. "Why did you not report this?" "To whom?" "Sheriff Morse was the first person on the scene. He declared it an accident before I finished my examination." "So you kept your own records?" "I keep records of everything, including the children who have disappeared from this town over the past 2 years. Dr. Blackwood turned to another page. Names filled the sheet in neat columns. Ages, descriptions, dates last seen. 12 children, all orphans or from families too poor to make their disappearances matter to the authorities. Cora stared at the list, each name representing a child, who had vanished into the same darkness that now held Luce and Samuel. "What do you want from me?" "I want to know why you are asking questions about dead men and missing children." The moment of truth had arrived. Cora could feel the weight of her decisions settling around her like dust after a windstorm. "Because I found 2 of them, alive, and I cannot leave them to die." Dr. Blackwood closed the journal with deliberate care. When she looked up, her eyes held the fierce determination of someone who had finally found an ally in a war she had been fighting alone. "Then we have work to do." The alliance formed in that moment, built not on trust, but on shared purpose. 3 broken people bound together by the weight of truth and the need to act. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows with the promise of storms to come. Dawn broke gray over Silverbrook as Joaquin led Cora through the maze of arroyos that cut the land beyond town. His boots found purchase on stone where hers would have slipped. He moved through the broken terrain with the fluid certainty of someone who belonged to this harsh country. They climbed toward a stand of cottonwoods that marked water in the desert. Hidden among the trees sat a cabin, weathered gray as old, bone and built to disappear into the landscape. "Josiah built this place when he first came to the territory," Joaquin said, "before he trusted anyone enough to live in town." The door opened with a creak that spoke of months without use. Inside, dust motes danced in shafts of morning light that fell through gaps in the shutters. The air held the stillness of a place where secrets had been kept and plans had been made. Joaquin moved to a loose floorboard near the cold fireplace. He pried it up with careful hands and withdrew a leather journal wrapped in oilcloth. He hid this the night before he died. Cora took the journal with reverence. The leather was worn smooth by Bramwell's hands, marked with the oils and calluses of a man who worked for his living. She opened to the first page and found neat handwriting that spoke of meticulous attention to detail. Dates, times, observations recorded with the precision of someone building a case. The early entries documented discrepancies in supply orders. Food purchased in quantities that far exceeded what was needed for the ranch hands. Medical supplies ordered but never delivered to Dr. Blackwood. Rope and chains bought in bulk and charged to accounts that did not exist. As she read deeper, the pattern emerged with sickening clarity. He was tracking the cattle drives, she said. Joaquin nodded. The routes changed every few months, always heading toward California or back east, always carrying more supplies than they should need. Cora turned the page and found sketches of faces. Children's faces drawn with careful attention to detail. Below each sketch, notes about when they had disappeared and which cattle drive had departed shortly after. He was trying to connect specific children to specific transports. Look at the last entry. Cora flipped to the final pages. Bramwell's handwriting had grown more urgent, the careful script giving way to rapid scratches across the paper. Thornfield knows, I suspect. Sheriff Morse asked too many questions about my visits to families with missing children. They are planning something. Need to find proof before they silence me permanently. Have identified the buyers. Wealthy families in San Francisco and Denver who pay premium prices for servants who cannot run away or complain to authorities. Some children sold to mining operations as laborers. Others simply disappear into houses where no one asks questions. Margaret Santos coordinates the stage line schedules to match cattle drive. Departures. Herbert Blackstone manages the money transfers through his bank. Sheriff Morse ensures no investigations proceed too far. The network is bigger than I thought. Silverbrook is just one hub in an operation that spans 3 territories. Cora's hands trembled as she read the final entry, confronting Thornfield tomorrow. If something happens to me, this journal contains everything needed to expose them. Pray that someone with courage finds it and finishes what I started. The silence in the cabin felt heavy as a grave. Outside, wind rattled the shutters with the sound of whispered warnings. He knew they would kill him, Cora said. Josiah was not a man who backed down from what was right, even when he should have. Joaquin's voice carried the weight of loss and admiration, mixed together. The grief of someone who had watched a good man walk toward certain death rather than compromise his principles. Cora turned back through the pages, studying the network Bramwell had uncovered. The scope of the operation made her stomach clench. Los and Samuel were just 2 children in a stream of victims that had been flowing for years. How many people in town know about this? More than you would think, fewer than you would hope. She found a page that listed townspeople by category. Those definitely involved, those probably complicit, those who suspected but said nothing, those who might help if approached carefully. Dr. Blackwood's name appeared in the final category, marked with a note. Asks the right questions, but has no power to act alone. He was planning to ask for her help. After he confronted Thornfield, he wanted proof that could not be dismissed or covered up. Cora studied the sketches of missing children again. Their faces stared back at her with the accusation of the abandoned. Each one represented a failure of the community to protect its most vulnerable. We need to get this information to territorial authorities. The nearest territorial marshal is 3 days' ride. By the time we could reach him and return with help, Luce and Samuel would be gone. The weight of time pressed against them. Cora could feel the minutes slipping away, while 2 children waited in darkness for salvation that might never come. What about the stage line? Margaret Santos controls all communication in and out of town. Any message we try to send will be intercepted. They sat in the dust-filled cabin, surrounded by the evidence of Bramwell's investigation and the proof of their own helplessness. The truth was in their hands, but truth without power was just another form of witness to atrocity. Joaquin stood and moved to the window. He peered through a gap in the shutters, scanning the horizon with the alertness of someone who had learned to watch for danger. Someone is coming. Cora joined him at the window. In the distance, a rider approached through the arroyos. The figure moved with purpose, following a direct line toward the cabin. Who knows about this place? Only Josiah and me. And now you. The rider drew closer. Cora could make out a woman on horseback, her posture straight and confident in the saddle. She wore men's clothes and rode with the efficiency of someone accustomed to covering long distances alone. It is Dr. Blackwood. They watched as she, dismounted and approached the cabin door. Her knock came sharp and urgent against the weathered wood. Joaquin opened the door. Dr. Blackwood stepped inside, her eyes immediately finding the journal in Cora's hands. "Good. You found it. How did you know we would be here?" "Because I have been watching Thornfield's movements since Josiah died. He has been searching for something, tearing apart the ranch, questioning the workers. It was obvious Josiah had hidden evidence somewhere." Dr. Blackwood moved to the table where Cora had spread the journal open. She studied the pages with clinical attention, her expression growing grimmer as she absorbed the scope of the operation. "This confirms what I suspected, but it also tells us we are running out of time." "What do you mean?" "Thornfield is planning to move the children tonight. I overheard him talking to the sheriff about a special transport. They know someone has been asking questions." The urgency hit Cora like a physical blow. Tonight, Luce and Samuel would disappear into the network of buyers and corrupt officials, lost forever in the vast territories where missing children became forgotten statistics. The wind outside had picked up, driving dust against the windows with the percussion of time running out. The Harvest Festival filled Silverbrook's main street with noise and laughter that felt obscene against the urgency burning in Cora's chest. Families gathered around tables laden with food while children played games in the dust. The normalcy of it all made her want to scream. Dr. Blackwood moved through the crowd with medical authority, checking on elderly townspeople and tending minor injuries with the calm efficiency that made her presence unremarkable. No one questioned why the town doctor carried a larger bag than usual, or why she lingered near certain buildings. Joaquin had positioned himself at the livery stable, ostensibly helping with the extra horses brought in for the celebration. His eyes tracked the movements of Sheriff Morse and Thornfield's men with the patience of a hunter, waiting for prey to reveal their patterns. Cora played her assigned role, the grieving almost bride accepting sympathy from well-meaning strangers. She nodded at condolences and smiled at invitations to join the festivities, all while her mind counted minutes until darkness would give them cover. The plan was simple. Dr. Blackwood would create a medical emergency that required Sheriff Morse's attention. Joaquin would disable the guard Thornfield had posted at the barn. Cora would free the children and lead them to horses hidden in the arroyo beyond town. Simple plans, Cora had learned, were the ones most likely to collapse under the weight of reality. As evening approached, the festival took on a different energy. Lanterns cast dancing shadows between buildings. Music from a fiddle drifted across the square, mixing celebration with the approaching darkness that would either bring salvation or disaster. Dr. Blackwood approached the platform where Mayor Hutchins was preparing to give his annual harvest speech. She whispered urgently in his ear, her expression grave with medical concern. "Ladies and gentlemen," the mayor announced, "Dr. Blackwood informs me that old Mrs. Patterson has taken a serious fall. She requests Sheriff Morse's assistance in moving the patient." Sheriff Morse pushed through the crowd toward the doctor, his face showing the irritation of a man whose evening had been interrupted. They disappeared together toward the edge of town where Mrs. Patterson's house sat isolated, among the cottonwoods. Cora felt her pulse quicken. The first part of their plan had worked. She made her way casually toward the barn, taking a circuitous route that avoided the main celebrations. The building loomed dark against the star-filled sky, its silence, stark contrast to the festival noise behind her. Joaquin should have already dealt with the guard. The barn door should be unlatched and ready. Instead, she found the door still secured and no sign of her ally. Something had gone wrong. Cora pressed herself against the barn wall, listening for sounds from within. She heard voices, multiple voices where there should have been silence. "Bring them up carefully. We cannot afford damage to the merchandise." Thornfield's voice carried clearly through the wooden walls. He was inside, supervising the removal of Luce and Samuel. "The wagon is ready," another voice replied. "Santos has the stage schedule coordinated. They will be in California before anyone knows they are missing." Margaret Santos. The stage line owner was more than just complicit. She was coordinating the entire transport operation. Cora's mind raced. Without Joaquin's help, she had no way to overcome multiple adults. Without the element of surprise, the children would be loaded into wagons and driven away while she stood, helpless in the darkness. The barn door creaked open. Cora pressed deeper into the shadows as two men emerged, carrying a large crate between them. The crate was big enough to hold two small children. Holes had been drilled in the sides for air. Her stomach clenched as she realized Luce and Samuel were inside, probably drugged into unconsciousness to make transport easier. The men loaded the crate into a covered wagon hitched to a team of horses. Thornfield emerged from the barn, brushing dust from his hands with the satisfaction of a job completed. "Take the back trail to the mesa. Santos will meet you at the old mining camp with the stage." "What about the woman asking questions?" "She will not be a problem much longer." The casual certainty in Thornfield's voice sent ice through Cora's veins. They knew about her involvement. The rescue attempt had been anticipated. She was walking into a trap. The wagon rolled away into the darkness, carrying Luce and Samuel toward a fate she could not prevent. Cora followed at a distance, staying in the shadows cast by buildings and fences. The back trail led up into the hills where abandoned mining claims dotted the landscape. Perfect places for clandestine meetings and the kind of business that required isolation from curious eyes. Cora climbed through rock and scrub brush, her dress catching on thorns and her shoes slipping on loose stone. She had not been raised for this kind of pursuit, but desperation gave her feet purchase where skill failed. The wagon stopped at a cluster of buildings that had once housed a silver mine. Lantern light flickered in the windows of what must have been the main office. More horses waited in the shadows and figures moved with the efficiency of a well-rehearsed operation. She crept closer, using the ruins of old mining equipment for cover. Margaret Santos stood beside an elegant stagecoach, checking a pocket watch with the precision of someone who ran transportation on strict schedules. She was younger than Cora had, expected perhaps 40, with the sharp intelligence of a successful businesswoman. "Right on time," Santos said as the wagon approached. "The buyers in San Francisco are expecting delivery by Friday." "What about the territorial marshal situation?" one of the men asked. Santos paused in her examination of the watch. Something in her posture shifted, becoming more alert. "What territorial marshal situation?" "Word came in this afternoon. There is a marshal asking questions about missing children in the next county over." The silence that followed stretched taut as a bowstring. Cora could feel the tension radiating from the group, even from her hiding place among the rocks. How close is this marshal to Silverbrook? Close enough to matter. Santos closed the watch with a sharp click. When she looked up, her expression had hardened into something cold and calculating. "Then we accelerate the timeline. These children go tonight, and anyone who might connect them to our operation needs to be silenced permanently." She turned toward the shadows where Cora crouched. "Including the curious bride who has been watching us from behind those rocks for the past 10 minutes. Cora's blood turned to ice water. Rough hands seized her arms before she could run, dragging her into the circle of lantern light where her face became visible to the assembled group. Thornfield smiled with the satisfaction of a man whose trap had worked perfectly. "Miss Whitmore, how convenient of you to join us." She found herself face to face with Margaret Santos, who studied her with the clinical interest of someone evaluating a problem that needed solving. "The territorial marshal you mentioned," Cora said, grasping for any advantage. "He knows about the children, he knows about all of you." Santos raised an eyebrow. "Does he? Or are you simply hoping that desperation makes a convincing lie?" The crate containing Luce and Samuel was being loaded into the stagecoach. Cora could hear faint sounds from within, suggesting the children were beginning to wake from whatever drug had been used to subdue them. "Actually," Santos continued, "I should thank you. Your investigation helped us identify the weaknesses in our security. We have made appropriate adjustments." She nodded toward the shadows. More figures emerged, including Sheriff Morse and two men Cora did not recognize. But no Joaquin. No Dr. Blackwood. "Where are my friends?" "Safe," Santos said. "For now. Their continued safety depends entirely on your cooperation." The trap had been complete and perfectly executed. Cora realized she had underestimated not just the scope of the operation, but the intelligence of the people running it. The wind picked up, scattering dust across the abandoned mining camp and carrying with it the sound of children crying from inside the stagecoach. Santos secured Cora's hands with rope that bit into her wrists. The bindings were tight enough to prevent escape, but not so tight as to damage what Santos clearly considered valuable merchandise. "Put her with the children," Santos ordered. 3 passengers for California instead of 2. The revelation hit Cora like cold water. She was not going to be silenced here in the desert. She was going to disappear into the same network that had swallowed so many others. They forced her into the stagecoach where Luce and Samuel huddled together in the corner. Both children were awake now, their eyes wide with fear and the lingering confusion of whatever drug had been used to subdue them. Luce reached for Cora's bound hands. The girl's fingers were cold as winter stone. "I knew you would come," she whispered. The faith in her voice cut deeper than any blade. Cora had come, but she had failed. Her rescue attempt had only delivered her into the same trap that held them. Through the coach window, she watched Santos directing the operation, with the precision of someone who had done this many times before. The woman checked papers, consulted schedules, and issued orders with the calm efficiency of legitimate business. "How long has this been happening?" Cora asked Sheriff Morse as he approached the coach. "Long enough to perfect the process. You are not the first idealistic fool who thought they could interfere. What happened to the others?" Morse's smile held no warmth. "Some learned to cooperate. Others provided object lessons about the consequences of defiance." He climbed onto the driver's seat as Santos made final preparations for departure. The operation was moving with clockwork precision toward its inevitable conclusion. But as the stagecoach lurched into motion, Santos made an unexpected announcement. "Change of plans, we are not going to California." Thornfield looked up from checking the harness. "What do you mean?" "I mean there really is a territorial marshal asking questions, and he is closer than we thought." Santos pulled a telegram from her coat pocket. The paper crackled in the desert wind as she read from it. "Marshal Rebecca Torres has been tracking child trafficking operations across 3 territories. She is currently investigating disappearances in Silver City. That is 2 days' ride from here." The name hit Cora like lightning. Rebecca Torres. She knew that name from newspaper articles back in Boston. The first female territorial marshal, famous for her relentless pursuit of criminals who preyed on the vulnerable. "How do you know this?" Thornfield demanded. "Because I am Marshal Torres." The words fell into the desert silence like stones into deep water. Santos straightened her shoulders and her entire bearing shifted from criminal accomplice to law enforcement authority. "I have been investigating this network for 8 months, building evidence, identifying all the participants, waiting for the right moment to take down the entire operation." Thornfield's hand moved toward his gun, but Santos was faster. Her weapon appeared in her grip with the fluid motion of someone who had drawn it many times before. "I would not recommend that." Sheriff Morse started to turn from the driver's seat but froze as additional figures emerged from the rocks around the mining camp. Men with badges and rifles who had been waiting in the darkness for this moment. "Deputy Marshal Coleman, Deputy Marshal Hayes, please arrest Sheriff Morse and Mr. Thornfield on charges of kidnapping, human trafficking, and murder." The deputies moved with professional efficiency, securing the criminals while Santos kept her weapon trained on the group. But Cora's relief turned to confusion as she processed what had just happened. "If you are a marshal, why did you let the operation continue? Why did you not stop it sooner?" Santos holstered her weapon and moved to free the children from the stagecoach. Her expression carried the weight of difficult choices made in pursuit of larger justice. Because arresting a few local criminals would not have stopped the network. The buyers in California, the contacts in Denver, the corrupt officials in territorial government who enable this trade, they would have simply found new suppliers. She cut the ropes binding Cora's hands with a knife that appeared from somewhere in her coat. "I needed evidence of the entire operation. Names, locations, financial records, proof that would allow Us to arrest everyone from the local kidnappers to the wealthy families who purchased children. But more children were taken while you gathered evidence. Yes. The single word carried a lifetime of moral complexity. Santos had chosen to sacrifice some victims to save many more, weighing individual suffering against systemic change. Where are Joaquin and Dr. Blackwood? Safe. Deputy Coleman has been coordinating with them for the past 3 days. They provided valuable intelligence about the local operation. As if summoned by her words, Joaquin appeared from behind the ruined mining equipment. Dr. Blackwood emerged from the shadows carrying her medical bag, moving immediately to examine the children. Cora felt the ground shift beneath her understanding of everything that had happened. The rescue attempt had not failed. It had been part of a larger plan orchestrated by people with resources and authority she had not known existed, but the knowledge came with its own burden. How many children could have been saved if I had not interfered? How many disappeared because I forced you to accelerate your timeline? Santos studied her with eyes that held the accumulated weight of difficult decisions. None. The timeline was already set. The operation was preparing to relocate after Bramwell's investigation got too close to the truth. Your involvement provided cover for our final evidence gathering. She gestured toward Thornfield, who was being secured with leg irons by one of the deputies. What matters now is that we have everyone. The local organizers, the transport network, the financial records that will lead us to the buyers. This operation is finished. Dr. Blackwood approached with Luce and Samuel, both children clinging to her hands as she guided them away from the stagecoach that had nearly carried them to a terrible fate. They will need time to recover, she said. But they are strong. They will heal. Cora knelt beside the children, meeting their eyes with the honesty they deserved. You are safe now. All of you are safe. But even as she spoke the words, she wondered about the children who had been taken before Marshal Torres could complete her investigation. The ones whose names appeared in Dr. Blackwood's journal but who would never return to families that mourned them. Justice, she was learning, was a complicated thing. It could be served without everyone being saved. It could come at a cost that felt almost as heavy as the crimes it punished. The wind carried the sound of horses approaching from the direction of town. More deputies, more officials, more representatives of a system that had finally turned its attention to protecting those who could not protect themselves. Dawn was still hours away, but Cora could feel something changing in the quality of the darkness around them. The trials took place in the territorial courthouse in Santa Fe, 3 months after the arrests at the mining camp. Cora sat in the witness box, her hands steady as she recounted finding 2 children in a cage beneath Thornfield's barn. The courtroom was packed with families who had lost children, reporters from Eastern newspapers, and officials who had come to witness the dismantling of a criminal network that had operated across state lines. Thornfield sat at the defendant's table, his face carved from stone. He had maintained his innocence despite the overwhelming evidence, clinging to respectability even as witness after witness described his crimes. Sheriff Morse had confessed in exchange for a reduced sentence. His testimony revealed the scope of the operation and implicated officials in territorial government who had taken bribes to ignore missing children reports. Dr. Blackwood testified about the suspicious circumstances surrounding Bramwell's death. Her medical records provided crucial evidence about the systematic nature of the abuse the children had suffered. Joaquin's testimony connected the cattle drive schedules to the disappearances, showing how the legitimate business had been used to cover criminal activity. But it was Luce who provided the most devastating testimony. She sat in the witness chair, her small frame dwarfed by the formal setting, and described in clear, precise language what had been done to her and the other children. Her words carried the weight of truth that no legal maneuvering could dismiss. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours, guilty on all charges. Thornfield received a sentence of 20 years in territorial prison. Morse got 15. The corrupt officials faced their own trials and punishments. But the real victory came in the aftermath. Marshal Torres's investigation had uncovered the entire network. Arrests were made in California and Colorado. Wealthy families who had purchased children faced prosecution. The financial records led to the shutdown of similar operations in other territories. 43 children were recovered and returned to families or placed in legitimate care. Not all of them, never all of them, but enough to matter. Cora stood outside the courthouse as the verdicts were read, watching families reunite with children they had thought lost forever. The joy was tempered by the knowledge that some families would never have such reunions. Justice was imperfect, but it was better than the alternative of doing nothing. She had made her decision about the future during the long months of testimony and legal proceedings. The train back to Boston left at noon. Her ticket sat in her purse, purchased with money from Bramwell's estate. She could return to the familiar world of creditors and social expectations, armed now with enough funds to make a fresh start. Instead, she walked to the telegraph office and sent a message to her former landlord in Boston, instructing him to sell her remaining possessions and forward the proceeds to Silverbrook. Luce was waiting when she returned to the hotel. The girl had grown taller during the months of recovery, and her eyes had lost some of their haunted quality. But she still sought out Cora's presence, clinging to the safety of the woman who had found her in darkness. "Are you leaving?" Luce asked. "No, I am staying." "Forever?" "For as long as you need me to." Samuel appeared in the doorway, his expression as serious as always, but no longer guarded against hope. He had begun speaking more freely during the trials, his intelligence emerging as he learned to trust the adults around him. "Dr. Blackwood says you are going to build a school. We are going to build a school. All of us together." Dr. Blackwood had proposed the partnership during the trials. Use Bramwell's inheritance to establish a school for children who had been displaced by tragedy or crime. Provide education and stability for those who had learned too early that the world could be a dangerous place. The territorial government had endorsed the project, recognizing the need for institutions that could help communities recover from the trauma of criminal exploitation. Joaquin had accepted the appointment as Silverbrook's new sheriff. His first act in office was to establish protocols for investigating missing children reports and coordinating with territorial authorities. The transformation had begun slowly, but gathered momentum as people realized they could build something better from the ruins of what had been destroyed. 6 months after the trials, Cora stood in front of a one-room schoolhouse built with funds from Bramwell's estate and donations from across the territory. 23 children sat at desks made by local carpenters, their faces bright with the possibility of futures that had once seemed impossible. Luce raised her hand to answer a question about arithmetic. Samuel helped a younger boy with his letters. Other children who had been recovered during the investigation worked alongside local students whose families had chosen to support the school. Dr. Blackwood served as the school's medical officer, ensuring that children who had survived trauma received the care they needed to heal completely. The building stood at the edge of Silverbrook, close enough to be part of the community but separate enough to feel safe for children who had learned to fear adult authorities. Through the window, Cora could see the desert stretching toward distant mountains. The landscape remained harsh and unforgiving, but it no longer felt hostile. It had become home. She had come to Silverbrook as a desperate woman seeking a marriage that would solve her financial problems. She had found instead a purpose that transformed her understanding of what it meant to build a life worth living. The children in her classroom represented hope made tangible. Each one was proof that even in the darkest circumstances, people could choose to protect rather than exploit, to build rather than destroy. The afternoon sun slanted through the schoolhouse windows, illuminating dust motes that danced in the warm air. Outside, the wind carried the sounds of a town learning to thrive rather than merely survive. Cora smiled as she watched her students work, their concentration absolute as they shaped letters and solved problems that would prepare them for futures they could now imagine. This was justice. Not perfect, but real. Not complete, but sufficient. The children were safe. The community was healing. And tomorrow would bring new opportunities to continue the work of building something better from the pieces of what had been broken. The school bell rang, marking the end of another day of learning and growth in a place where both had once seemed impossible. And that is all to the story, for now. Please let me know where you are tuning in from. Perhaps we will create a story there. Consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel, and if you enjoy our content, click this video on your screen. I promise you it's worth watching. See you tomorrow.